Welcome back from lunch, everybody. So this afternoon we're going to start off with a debate between two members of the sponsoring groups. We've got Jamar Martin, who's the organization chair for the Wichita Atheists. We've got Abram Howell, who's the president of the WSU Atheists Agnostics. And we also have, on the other side, Father James Weldon from the Church of the Resurrection, and Alex Ball, who's a parishioner at the church and also occasionally comes out to our Skeptics events. So we're going to start with a little bit of an opening statement from each of the panel members. Let's start with Father Weldon.
Alex called me a few weeks ago and asked if I'd like to participate in this. He's friends with several of the people who are participants here, so I thought I would be glad to do that. I think that, I don't know where to start. The human person, we want to know the truth. We seek the truth. And it's part of our intelligence. It's part of who we are. And so our whole life is a quest for that. And as a Catholic, as a Christian, I think we're searching for the truth. And the truth is not a possession that I have or that belongs to anyone, but rather it's something that is greater than any of us. It's about an encounter with reality. So to experience reality and to hopefully in some way to describe it in a way that makes sense. As we encounter reality, it's best to use our own senses. Our eyes and our ears, as human beings, we are physical beings, and so we learn through our senses, and that's how we encounter the world around us. And it's an ideal situation that what I know or what I act on is a result of the knowledge I've gained through my own senses. However, at times there are things that we don't know through our own senses, and that we trust other people. So someone is an expert in a field, and so I make an act of faith, a human act of faith, in that person. So scientists tell me that the Earth is 90 million or 93 million miles away from the sun, something like that. And so I don't know that. They have ways of figuring that out. I'm not smart enough to do that. So I'm just going to rely on their expertise and trust them with that. And so that seems like a pretty widespread consensus. I don't know anyone, they might argue, down to the 10th of a mile or a couple of miles. I don't know what the argument in the scientific field is about the distance of the Earth from the sun is. But we rely on their expertise. So it's best to know things yourself. And then if that's not available, then you rely on the expertise of another person, other human beings, and I would call that human faith. And then what Christians do, or I would say, is that there is something that is proposed to us which is greater than our human capacity is able to know, is able to grasp. And so we would call that revelation, that God reveals himself. And so when I make an act of faith, I believe there's two acts in that act of faith. First is I believe the person, and then second, I believe what they tell me. So if I believe the person, I accept in some sense their authority, and then I believe what the person tells me. So a witness to some event here on earth, we all do that all the time. In court they do this. Is this a credible witness? In different aspects of life, I think we all make a decision to trust. Somebody handed me a bottle of water a few minutes ago, and I don't know that person. I'm making an act of trust that that's not, poison, and I'm just going to drink it. So I took a big drink, and I made an act of trust. So trust the person, and then trust what they tell me. This is water. So that's what we do. So in our Christian faith, we say that God reveals himself, and that so what God reveals is what we believe, and then the person is God. So I think that's my opening statement. I don't know what else to say.
Thank you. Yeah. Jamar, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. I'm an assistant organizer for the Wichita Atheists. If I can put in a plug, it's a fantastic group. bring to this debate. When I was at a young age, I attended Topeka Collegiate, which is a secular private school, and I got a really hands-on, hardcore science reasoning-based education. Somewhere out there, there's a PBS special that features this little black kid with a huge afro digging up fossils out of the Flint Hills. Somewhere around the age of 9, my parents thought it'd be a good idea for their children to have an outstanding moral upbringing, so we started to go to church. And it was there where I first encountered this idea of faith, the idea of belief in things unseen. And even more than that, the idea that there's knowledge that can be attained through the divine, through the revealed, through the supernatural. And to be honest, I really struggled with this because it seemed entirely opposed to everything I knew about how to discover what truth actually was. I got into philosophy after that. I actually attended a Catholic philosophy seminar put on by Dr. Iliff up in Topeka. It was fantastic. I did debate, lost the state championship in debate, and headed a couple of philosophy groups in college, one of them called The Naked Truth. But to be honest, philosophy never, while it taught me how to think, it didn't do a very good job at ultimately deciding for me what is true and what isn't. However, my continued experience with the natural sciences did. And eventually, after a while, after a lot of prodding, a lot of soul searching, I came to the conclusion that the universe is governed by natural processes. And not only that, but the supernatural, the divine, the faith simply aren't allowed in the universe. And the reason for that is we have a setting in the universe. It's like a basketball game, right? We have a setting, the players are ready, and then we have rules, and we have a mechanism to make the whole thing go. What the supernatural, what the faith, what the divine says is that there's something above those rules, something above that mechanism that allows things to happen without them. And that just doesn't drive. When you want a specific result, you need something specific to happen, a natural process that makes things go. Otherwise, you really don't have a rational argument. You don't have a defensible position. And that's my position. I have a naturalist philosophy on this, and I'm really looking forward to see what these other guys have to say.
Let's switch back to the other side of the table for a second with Alex.
So my name is Alex. Do you guys hear me okay? Yep. So I was born and raised as a Catholic. My parents were Catholic, went to Catholic church, went to Catholic school for about 4 years, and then went to public school. And at first, you're forced to go to church. And I remember when I was younger thinking, why am I here? I mean, people are talking about stuff I don't understand. It's uncomfortable. Your parents make you dress up. Stuff like that. So I had that upbringing. So I at least knew what Catholicism was. Maybe not what it was all about, but I knew it existed. I knew some of the basic teachings. So then, as I grew older, you mature and you learn things. You learn about science in school, and you reach a point where you have to decide for yourself: is this something I want to continue doing? Because my parents can't make me do it anymore. So is this something I want to continue doing? I ultimately decided yes, which is probably why I'm on this side of the table today. So we were taught science in Catholic school. We were taught science in public school, and I never saw a conflict. So I remember being taught evolution. You hear all these arguments today about intelligent design versus evolution. One has to be right, the other has to be wrong. And I never really saw that conflict when I was growing up because the science explained the what. science explained what happened, what existed, but it never really talked about the why. So why are we here? Why do we exist? Why does the universe exist? And science can explain theory of maybe how the universe came to be. The theory I'm most familiar with is Big Bang. I don't know if there's anything newer. But again, that doesn't conflict with what I'm taught at church. So I guess I'm kind of interested to hear the other side of the story in a way. So we talk about natural processes, but why does that go against faith?
Thank you, Alex. And then our fourth panelist is Abram. So if you'd like to make your opening statement, then we'll get into that discussion.
In a lot of conversations with believers, in my experience, faith gets talked about in many different ways, in a lot of different contexts. So on one side of the spectrum, we all have a faith of a sort that the air in this room, for example, isn't going to spontaneously turn into gold. That seems to me like really some solid reasons. We don't have any experience in air doing that. And on the other hand, we have faith talked about for beliefs, in defense of things like I'm going to get whisked up into the air and raptured away tomorrow at 2 p.m. Something for which we have considerably less evidence, it seems to me. And that this is kind of the thing to notice. We'll start off talking about this first kind of really mundane faith that my car's going to start, and then this other faith sort of creeps into the conversation about things for which we don't have solid, convincing reasons. And it seems to me pretty telling that that's when faith gets talked about. When we don't, we'd be happy to start off with believing something like the resurrection or the rapture if there are really solid facts to just bring to the table. But when we start hearing about faith, that's when it seems suspicious to me. Why are we hearing about faith at all if there's so many good reasons to believe? I don't need faith of that sort that my car's going to start. It just keeps doing it. So additionally, it seems really conspicuous to me when I hear believers talking about how there's a special realm of beliefs that aren't subject to scientific scrutiny, that this category of beliefs, just evidence isn't important over here. Because we're not talking about evidence beliefs, that's science stuff. These are faith beliefs. This seems to me like exactly the kind of defense we would expect from something imaginary, from something for which there isn't good evidence. And so I'd really especially like to get Father Weldon's take on that.
All right, thank you, Abram. And I guess we can start the conversation then. Father Weldon, from now on, you guys just talk whenever you feel like.
I guess, Jamar, the church, or the Catholic Church, that's the other thing which is easy to pick on, is that we Christians don't even know what we're saying, amongst each other. So I'm here as a Catholic priest, and so I would say that the church has a great respect for the natural sciences, and say that, and in fact, the church would call that the natural law, which governs the ordering of the created world. And so one of our Catholic beliefs is that God created the world ex nihilo, that He created it out of nothing. And so that would be an article of faith that a Christian should hold. But that the universe has an existence of its own, and that it's planned. You mentioned the idea of a basketball court with its rules and motion and how everything works in that game, is that we would say that God created that there is a creator and then there is the creation, and that there's these two things. Whereas a different view than that would be that the universe or the physical world has always existed, or that the physical world is eternal, that it has no beginning and no end. So that's a question. So I guess I would say from the Christian perspective is that we have a creator and a creation, and it was the created world came into existence at a point in time. Would the natural sciences say that the universe or the physical world is eternal?
Well, you're talking about time here, and and the physics of that gets a little interesting. I'm not sure it's something we need to get into too much depth here. But when you talk about there being a supernatural cause to the universe, what is relevant is that whenever we have ever examined any question in the history of the universe, it always turns out that the answer is not a magical cause. And that is relevant. And not only,
what do you mean by magical? I don't know what you mean by
it's always a natural event. It's always, these are the rules of the game. This is the setting. And as a result of those two combining together, there is an inevitable result.
So there's a predictability and
and
in the natural world?
And even more than that, we see that there has to be a mechanism, right? The strings have to be attached to the puppet for something to happen. And if they're attached, then we can measure the strings. It becomes a scientific question. So when you posit something that is supernatural, something that's based on faith, it's just not something that you recognize in this world. It's not something that is known. It's not even something that's possible. It's like the magician, right, who pulls a rabbit out of his hat by saying, "Alakazam." Well, why didn't a turtle come out, right? There's got to be a mechanism that when he says Alakazam, a rabbit comes out, and when he says all the peanut butter sandwiches, a turtle comes out. What's that connection? What makes that happen? If it is there, then we study it with science, it's measurable, and we can know about it. But faith says, well, there's something divine, something outside the rules that can make things happen. And that simply isn't allowed in the universe.
So part of our ability to know the truth is that we can measure, or I guess in the field of science, that we can measure it.
There's that restriction, but there's more than that. There's a restriction, kind of a logical restriction on how we can set up a system. And positing reactions, positing events that don't follow a rational timeline doesn't make for a feasible system.
I'm a little worried we're going to start getting
I don't think
technology and just debating over how science experiments go down. I'm certainly not equipped to handle that. I'm just an art student, so I can stick to stuff I've heard from believers.
Okay.
I mean,
what's your perspective?
well, I mean,
Transition to work.
my worry with some of the analogies, like the basketball game and the puppet on the strings, is that even those analogies they're very easy to just see. You can't help but see agency behind it because we know somebody did make up the rules. We can just easily see whoever made a basketball, like boom, that's the guy. Whoever is literally the puppeteer. When to my eye, science shows more and more frequently it's not just the natural forces behind so many of these phenomena. Everything, not just every time we discover it's a natural thing. More importantly to me is that it's a mindless, indifferent, it's just the mechanisms, it's just the way stuff works. And of course, like if we go far enough back and it turns out Yahweh's there and he's been pulling shit all the time, but baller, science isn't an institution that says from the get-go only natural things are allowed. It is just whatever turns out to be true. However you find out what's true, that's what we do. And it's just rigorous, strict standards for evidence and experimentation, repeatability. That's really what science is. It doesn't say, sorry, Godzilla's not allowed because we already said so from the get-go. It doesn't just presume that. As you're describing this quest for truth, it really is far more that and just really that.
But can you logically construct a universe? Can you construct any system where you don't have this if-then relationship among the elements, right?
Right. I mean, I can't even. I'm not asserting that I can do that anyway. Right?
Well, I'm asserting that it's not even possible.
Sure.
That.
I guess that's a worry of mine. Is a lot of times that believers will see us as dogmatically skeptic. They wouldn't believe anyways because they've hardened their heart, to Jesus. They won't even listen to reason, and then it just makes them appear to have a more reasonable position. Like, well, we're not being dogmatists. Well, when really, yeah, it does seem impossible to me. But just like my disbelief in God's existence is just an assessment of the reasons around me. So if more data comes in and I'm forced to reevaluate, I just want true beliefs and I don't want false ones. To me, that's more important than whether I believe in Jesus at the end of the day.
Well, let's let these guys tell us
drop some knowledge.
why they have this knowledge.
Right.
Well,
yeah, I'm still really.
I think in Christian philosophy, St. Thomas Aquinas, he says that we cannot comprehend God. God is not something that we can comprehend. I don't want to say the idea of God, but the reality of God is something that is greater than our human capacity. That is, we as human beings have a capacity to know things, and they reach there's a limitation to that. We don't have unlimited knowledge, and so we experience things, and we seek to understand them, but yet there's things in life that we don't understand that are greater than our human capacity. And so St. Thomas says, God is that which we can't comprehend. I mean, we can't measure him. And kind of to step back a little bit, we use the word universe. Normally, if I'm examining something, you're doing a science experiment, it's in the test tube or it's on the table, and I'm examining this thing to see how it reacts. But when we speak about the universe is, to me, is something difficult to. I'm hesitant to use that word because I can't look at the universe. I'm inside the universe. I'm inside this thing, so how can I possibly look at it from the outside? So I can't know the total breadth and depth of it from the inside. So part of the scientists, how they gain knowledge is by being outside of something and looking at it and measuring it. It's this tall or it's this wide or it has these characteristics, these capacities, whatever. And those are all good things that we do. But we're in this system, and everything in the system is contingent on something else. So I guess kind of one of the proofs for God's existence is that everything is contingent, that everything is put in motion by something before it. You've heard it before. So that everything is dependent on something that moves before it, and does that go on for infinity?
Right.
Or is there a beginning?
Right. As far as, I think you're describing something like the cosmological argument, right? I mean, on any side of the God debate, there's going to be, we all have to say, it's a crazy logical puzzle. We have an infinite regress in either case. Either natural forces always existed, or God always existed. But it doesn't seem to have gotten us anywhere, you know what I mean? So in my mind, that's really, it's neither here nor there, because it doesn't prove or disprove, it doesn't speak to or against any position.
The physicists are going to say that time is a property that's internal to the universe, and talking about the universe being created or time before the universe is really just a made-up question.
Right. Well, it's not something that you can answer, or that I can't answer. I mean, I'm not.
Well, even that the question is maybe not even right. It's a wrong question. But you mentioned something about the limitation of our own perspectives, right? And how that ought to give rise to some trust in the divine or perhaps in theology. But to me, it's something very opposite of that. Humans historically have been just awful at using our natural perceptions and being able to determine what is true and what is not. So when we talk about our own personal perspective, we need to keep in mind that we're humans, right? And so, like in the case of faith, there's so many faiths out there, so many. And all of them are in a minority opinion. So we know at the very least, the majority of the people in the world are deluded on the question of faith. Now, unless you have a tiebreaker, unless you have some really hardcore evidence to show that your faith is somehow better than other people's faith, you need to be internally skeptical of yourself and not just trust it just because it's your own idea.
I think I always am searching for the truth. I don't believe I have the truth completely, or I've got it all sewn up. So I'm always, I mean, that's why I'm here, you know, is to have a dialogue, to learn more about how human beings try to discover the truth. So I think I'm always, well, I try to be at least honest in that sense, that I'm always searching for the truth at a deeper level. And that's always a human quest.
So, but what is it? What has persuaded you to come to this particular conclusion about this particular faith?
Now, I will say, so I kind of talked about how, okay, in my opening statement I mentioned how I had to decide for myself if it was true or not. And there have been times I have questioned my faith. Maybe it's something I don't like, maybe it's something I find hard to believe. Now, I've never found a case where it actually contradicts what science has proven time and time again. Okay, we're not questioning gravity or that the world is round or anything like that. I guess one image I have in my mind is if we plot everything we know in a graph, you'll get a bunch of discrete points. And maybe you can see patterns, maybe you can predict things based on those points, but they're all discrete points. Whereas, when you talk about the supernatural like God, it's continuous. And it can connect those points that science can't. You can answer things like, you know, how did the universe come into being? Okay, God created it. And I suppose as to why I chose Catholicism over other faiths, it's, I'll say, coherent. It just makes sense. Whereas some other faiths, that's not going to be good enough.
You know.
Right. I mean, you've talked a lot. You mentioned a couple.
So what do you mean it makes sense? I'll
Okay,
press
all right,
on
sure,
that.
sure.
So what do you mean it makes sense? You got to come with more than that.
It's consistent within itself. So other faiths. So some non-denominational Christian churches you go to, and it really is all about, let's just feel good. Let's sing a bunch of songs and listen to somebody talk about some topic they chose based on whatever research they chose. You can go into different non-denominational churches and have them teach different things. You can go into different, I'll say sects or denominations. Some denominations will tell you that belief isn't really important. It's important that you believe in Jesus, and that's it. And you have all these people that disagree, and they say that's okay. I've read things about people who went on missionary trips with other Christians, and they have trouble trying to decide what to teach the people because everyone on the mission disagreed on certain points of Christianity. So you see all this inconsistency. Whereas in Catholicism, it's consistent. So I'm not going to hear Father Weldon tell me something and then go to a different parish and have them tell me something completely different. They're not going to conflict. And
or one of us is going to be not teaching the Catholic faith. Right.
Yeah. And you look at how the priest come to be a priest. They didn't just decide someday, hey, I'm going to go convince a bunch of people that I know what I'm talking about. And see how many followers they can get and how much money they can get. They had to go through a process. They had to go through 80 years. Father Weldon can tell you more specifics on that, but they had to go through training and they had to be ordained. So I guess to me that the church is marked with a certain sense of consistency.
Right? I mean, of course, you're not going to find a believer on the planet throughout human history who's going to say, well, despite Catholicism's internal consistency, despite the utter inconsistency of my faith, my Muslim faith, my Norse faith, my Hinduism, really just stuck with it, you know, just stubbornly, and decided to go to hell. Like, I mean, this is absurd, right? Everybody's going to say theirs is the most consistent when they were raised within it. I mean, you've got every societal norm just giving you, even the idea that I was raised within Catholicism for however many years, and then once I was 12 and we had confirmation, then I was decided I was allowed to go my own way. Never mind the fact that I'd already had this much familial experience with it. It's not like I was moving out of the house at 12, so I was still kind of under pressure to be a Catholic. I mean, this is the case of every faith tradition throughout time on the entire planet. Everybody's going to say that this is the most consistent.
We're not doing a very good job. We have so many following Catholics. I mean,
You're not wrong.
I mean, they're leaving in droves, so we're not doing a very good job of brainwashing.
Yeah, certainly. I'm happy to say that it's getting more and more liberalized all the time. I prefer modern Christianity, of course, with internal inconsistencies and not as many crusades. I'm sure we all do that. At the same time, I mean, earlier you mentioned a couple of times that there aren't contradictions between scientific conclusions and faith-based conclusions, or maybe even just specifically Catholic ones. This could not be more false. I mean, just the second you look at things like this, about how...
Does Galileo get a call out for Galileo here?
We can even say, Catholics have come out and they've apologized for this, and they've said there were people doing the same work Galileo was doing, and they did not get excommunicated. And I guess Galileo was just a jerk, right? That's fine. Even that is okay. What we're really talking about here is things like the human survival of death, or the physics of transubstantiation, right? I mean, these are things that fly directly in the face of everything science has gathered and all this knowledge. And again, scientific conclusions get overturned all the time. We're happy to get them overturned. We want to have the truest beliefs. And that only comes from stringent standards of data collection and not just figuring it out. What it doesn't come from is wishful thinking and prayer. I mean, really, these are just far less consistent ways to get information than just experimentation or even just our daily experience with the world. We know the air is not going to turn into gold, not because I've tested the air 1,000 times, but really I have done 28 years of experimentation informally with air. I know a little bit about it, at least as much as any other 28-year-old, right?
Well, do we have any Pastafarians in the audience? Right? Pastafarians, the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. It's a different religion.
It's definitely different.
Not only is it different, but it's entirely congruent with scientific thought of today, right? There's no conflict, partly because it's contrived, but but just because something agrees with the science of the day doesn't make it true. And in the case of religion, in the case of faith, science doesn't need it to explain what occurs. And so, why do we need it, right? If we have a sufficient way to explain the world, why would we go to faith? Why would you posit the extra step, other than it makes us more comfortable with how we feel and our own personal beliefs?
So I guess you asked the question, why Catholicism for me? And I guess I would go back to more of an anthropic principle of, the human heart and whatever that is. Not the physical organ that's pumping blood through my body right now, but the human person.
The heart.
We're filled with desire, with expectation, and is that something special in the universe? Or I suppose a meteorite will come and hit the Earth someday and we'll all be wiped out and the universe will just keep on going, you know, without us here. The universe doesn't need us here. So that, to me, it's what Catholicism does is it acknowledges the truth, the goodness of creation, the goodness of reality in itself, that human nature is a good thing, that the created world is a good thing, that's not evil. So in some cultures, there's a dualism. You know, you have there's good and there's evil, and so you know Plato has this world of the ideals. You know, and we need to escape the flesh, and everything that's physical matter is evil, and we need to escape that into a spiritual realm. But Catholicism doesn't teach that. You know, it teaches that the physical world is a good thing, and that it's made according to a plan and a design. And it teaches that human beings are made in the image and likeness of God. So what does that mean? I mean, that we're grasping after something which is infinite.
But why is it true? There's so many theologies in the world, all sprung from this faith, this personal belief. And they're mutually exclusive. They can't all be true. So just because you feel that way, or just because your philosophy, just because your religion explains things, doesn't make it true. The question is, why should we consider any particular faith? Why should we consider Catholicism just on those grounds?
I think all the church asks us to do is to seek the truth with sincerity of heart. We all have the obligation, everyone, whether you're an atheist or a Catholic or a Muslim or whatever, to seek the truth. That our human minds are made to search for the truth. And I think, you know, the church can have a conversation with anyone that's doing that. And so that's why I'm glad to talk to anybody, is they're searching for the truth.
Right, so it sounds like the truth is then, I mean, that's the most important thing, right?
Certainly.
So whatever the ways to most efficiently get to that, you know, to get our best picture of what reality looks like, we should go with those tools, right? The more specific, the more refined we can get, the better we are doing, right? This, of course, is not unique to Catholicism or even to science. It's just things people do. So it seems to me that with something like faith, just an assertion of truth, or you know, the way you were describing faith at the beginning as just a trust in a being, or at least a person
and what they tell you.
Sure. It doesn't sound exactly like what we hear in the Bible, you know, like blessed are those who have seen or blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe. I mean, this seems to fly directly in the face of scientific values. I mean, if that's not counter to science, I don't know what it is, honestly. I mean,
so would it be your position that the only thing that exists is physical matter?
not at all. Only that we need solid reasons to think that there's anything besides that. We only have evidence so far that physical matter exists, right? But again, like, I'm happy to default to whoever's got. I, as an art student, do certainly not have the Nobel Prize requisite to drop some knowledge on everybody here. Like, here's what happened before the Big Bang. Listen up. I think Lawrence Krauss is going to be speaking sometime, right? Let him go. Yeah, if only. So that's his jam, right? But of course, as lay people, we're not concerned with what physicists have to say about the beginning of the universe because, well, I mean, it's really awesome and cool. We are concerned. But as far as on the question of whether God exists or whether we need to use faith to determine that or to determine anything, I mean, people have been making those decisions for as long as there have been people, independent of what physicists tell us about string theory or Big Bang, right? I mean, are we unjustified talking about this question until Lawrence Krauss is able to tell us about string theory? I mean, I sure hope not.
I think that's why we're talking about it. Right. And it's some kind of evidence that human beings, like from the beginning, in every culture, have tried to, I don't know, they're trying to get at something that is more than what they're able to grasp, you know, with their physical senses. all these different manifestations of religion, are all different ways that human beings are trying to figure out what this life is about. So, I don't know. Sure. Is our life about something? I mean, it's great to know the scientific facts about things, but to me it goes back to the question of why. And that's an anthropological.
It is, but for, was it 3.5, so many billion years on this earth, life has been going on, and it's always been about eat, reproduce, survive. And then all of a sudden we have this thinking being, right? And it's like, what is it all about, right?
Sure.
Life really is about life. It's about producing more life. It's about replicating itself. And while we can take personally this incredible intellect that has evolved, it's still a physical thing. When we talk about the mind is just something the brain does.
Sure.
And the brain is an entirely biological thing. There are things that you can affect it with drugs, affect it physically, and it changes the way you think. We can make you forget about your faith by giving you amnesia, by hitting you across the head. Does that mean you lose your salvation? If someone with multiple personalities, does that mean like one of the personalities gets saved and the other one doesn't? There's all these absurdities that accrue when you start with a premise that isn't well-grounded. And the well-grounded way to think of things is that this is a natural, physical world, and all the processes are governed thereby. And our intellect, our ability to reason about faith, is a product of that. And we need to keep that in tune when our imaginations or our will go astray.
Do we want to?
Yeah, I was just about to interrupt you and say I think it's time to go to questions. So if you guys want to raise your hands, I will come on out to pick people. And as I walk out there, maybe you guys can discuss a question I have. So it seems like, I know Jamar used the word sufficient. So it seems like you guys seem to think that natural laws are sufficient. That's all that's required. And there's no room for faith. And it seems, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like Father Weldon and Alex are saying that there is room for faith. I don't think either side is saying that faith alone is going to do it. You do need to make sure that your faith matches the evidence and reality. So if you guys maybe could just talk a little bit about why you think faith is not required and doesn't even fit, and why you guys think faith is required and does fit.
I can start. We had heard a talk from Ben Holman earlier discussing the merit of faith, and I think he had mentioned a couple of things that were really especially pertinent. So this idea that faith isn't enough, or that somehow science doesn't leave room for faith, it seems to me that it's kind of the other way around. I mean, in the realm of science, if we had faith and no evidence, then we just wouldn't have a conclusion. We would just have a hypothesis. We just have a question we want to pursue. As we start to accrue evidence, then we're good to go. Then we can start talking seriously about what it means. Whereas you never have just faith and then getting us to a conclusion. You know what I mean? Or that means people are certainly jumping to those conclusions all the time. But they don't necessarily, I mean, they have the same frequency of mapping onto reality as guesses.
To clarify my position on it, and it's not that I am entirely opposed to the idea of faith, but certainly all the answers that we have ever received, that we have any confidence about the reality of the universe, have come to as a result of the scientific method.
Oh, sure.
Absolutely.
So you're talking about certitude.
Right. And we don't need faith. Now, if there was something in faith that explains something that couldn't be explained by science, and could do that with extreme predictability, it might be something we'd be worth considering, but it's just not that.
My question was for Alex there on the end. You had said that you chose Catholicism because it seemed to be the most consistent to you, and I was wondering how you justify that view with the fact that Catholic law and dogma has been revised, edited, and rewritten time and again by every pope throughout the course of history.
So there's certain core beliefs or certain principles you'll notice that never change. Now, as the world around us changes, I'd be careful how to say this. There's new applications for those doctrines and those principles that were held throughout time. So certain beliefs have never changed, like we've never said.
Well, the consistent belief in the incarnation. I mean, that is a Christian tenet of faith. So that the incarnation is a teaching of the church from the beginning.
From the beginning of early Christianity, right? Not from the tradition of the Jews before that.
Well, right.
Well, but
Right.
From the time of Jesus, right? Not from the time before Jesus.
And even with that, a lot of our beliefs are unchanged from the Jewish. We believe in the same God. We believe in the same Scripture as the Jewish. We didn't change that.
Right. I mean, there's.
Here, let's stick with this question here. So, I think his question is there's inconsistencies over the history of the church, at different times and different places.
You can be consistent,
Right.
but you can be consistently wrong too.
Right.
No.
Right.
So, and even if you have a belief that you say, well, it's in tune with science and we're consistent with ourselves, what are you bringing new to the table? I mean, what are you doing to justify yourself?
Well, I think what Catholicism, and I speak for Catholicism, is we're trying to figure out what is the purpose of our human life. What is the purpose and the meaning of our human life? And so, so living organisms for, 3 billion years or 3.5 billion years, whatever, is to make new living organisms, to reproduce. That's the purpose of human life, which I'm failing at miserably. All right, as Catholics, we're trying to figure out what is the purpose, what is the meaning of our human life. That's what we're bringing to the table.
That's great, but
Right.
that's 99% of all the ideologies and philosophies in the world. Is that we're trying to figure out what it's all about.
Right.
That's great, but I want to know about credibility. Why am I going to pick one from the other? And there's so many. Chances are, the real thing that's at the bottom of it is that people are just really good at making stuff up.
So does it correspond?
Yeah.
Does it correspond, to our humanity? Does it correspond with humanity? Is a question. So
I think
are we just making something up that fulfills something that I desire as a human being? That's the question.
Well, I'll just say, so in summary, my answer is those core beliefs and principles have remained consistent throughout time.
I would like to say, first of all, thank you for coming out. You're very brave for stepping out of your comfort zone.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah. My question is for Father Weldon. At the beginning, you spoke about that you took a drink of the water because you had faith that the water was fine. But in reality, you're basing that on the evidence of that whenever people give you water, that you're not being poisoned. So I would like to go back to the basis of this discussion, that why is faith based on absolutely no evidence? Because the fact that you drink that water is based on evidence. Why is faith based on no evidence? Blind faith is, I think, more of the girth of this discussion. Why is that a good thing?
before I took a drink of water?
I'm sorry, what?
I had faith, the person handed it to me.
That it wasn't poisonous.
That it wasn't poison. Before I took it, I didn't know anything about it.
But you knew from your past experiences that if you're 30 years old, for the past 30 years of your life, you've never died from drinking the poisoned water. So you're basing that on the evidence. You know, we get the argument of the faith in God is the same that your faith that the sun's going to rise. No, if you're 30 years old, you have 13,000 instances of the sun rising. You're basing it on that evidence. And so my question is, why is the other faith, the faith 2 country that was referenced in the other discussion, why is that a good thing as opposed to the faith that you get from your own evidence?
Abram, could you quickly, Father Weldon wasn't here for the first discussion, so could you tell him what they meant when you talked about faith 1, faith 2?
Faith 1, faith 2 distinction is one of like faith in electricity, and the sun's rising, and that kind of thing, and very mundane things for which we have tons of instances that it happens a certain way. And then faith 2, I think it said something like, this is what believers are talking about when they talk about faith in the resurrection, despite not having what at least Ben saw as very good evidence.
Right. So I have knowledge from my experience of life, because I've lived for so long, that it's typically safe to drink water when someone gives it to you. So I have that knowledge. I think that, in Scripture, there's psalms or songs, the heavens are telling the glory of God, or, we look and see the beauty of the world and how the stars are fashioned, and you mentioned the sun coming up in the morning, and that, the sun coming up every day is a spectacular thing that we have nothing to do with, that exists, and that is spectacular, even though it's happened as long as the Earth has existed, or I don't know about the formation of solar systems, but that's been happening for a long time. It doesn't lose its glory, or the fact that it's something that is beyond us. So I guess my answer to you would be that, so from my experience of the physical world, and that idea of if there's puppets on a string, is that there's someone pulling the strings, that there is an order to the universe. Stephen Hawking, he said, there's no such thing as a human soul. When a human being dies, your body just decomposes, and that's what's left. And and he says it's like a computer that wears out, and you throw it in the trash heap. But the computer has the great benefit of someone that designed the computer, put it together and built it. So do I know absolutely with scientific certitude that we have a soul that's going to continue to exist? I don't know that with the same scientific certitude. But it seems to me that from the world, from the order of the world, that there is a design behind it, that there's a creator. And I can't show it to you. I can't hold it in my hands and say, here he is. I can't.
Thank you. This one is for James Weldon. Mr. Weldon, when asked to justify your faith, several times during the debate, you made allusions to the fact that human beings cannot know everything, as if the following conclusion should be that because human beings cannot know everything, the church can know that a Canaanite Jew rose from the dead 2,000 years ago. If human ignorance is not tantamount to the church's knowledge, what is the point of even bringing that up in the course of the debate?
I guess that the human person is searching for the truth, and then God is something beyond that. I was hoping to say that we have at least some humility in front of the reality of existence. That the truth is not a possession that belongs to me. In regards to the resurrection, I believe that because of the witnesses, that witnesses said that this happened, and I believe those witnesses. So, and you might say, well, that's not a very good reason to believe something, but it's different than a scientific proof. In science you have a proof, and this is the way it is, and by this proof I know the same thing will happen tomorrow when I do that same experiment. So the knowledge of the resurrection is from those who bear witness to it.
I understand what you're saying, Mr. Weldon, but there's a problem here.
Ladies and gentlemen.
It doesn't seem as though you are being as skeptical about your own faith as you are of other faiths. There's so many other faiths out there that are held just as deeply as yours. They're about searching about what the universe is about humanity, and they are entirely incompatible with the conclusions that you've come up with. But how can you simply say, I feel this way, I believe this way, because I'm searching for humanity, when we know so many other people in the world are doing the exact same thing, and most of them have to be wrong? Chances are all of them are wrong if there isn't a real mechanism, a real way that they're evaluating this as to be true. How are you claiming that your particular faith has any kind of truth in it?
Well, I'm trying to keep it broad, just as creator and creation. If I was going to talk with a Muslim, I'd rather have a debate with a Muslim, about the difference between how do Islam and Christianity go about this quest for the meaning of human existence. So to me, I find that's too specific.
Well, even that broad claim that creator, creation, I'm sure there's plenty of faiths out there that don't agree with that claim.
Right.
And they're still based on faith. They're still based on this personal feeling. Yet you're going to go ahead and pick one just because it's yours and not somebody else's.
Well, I know your question is about how can I pick one faith over another, because there's so many. That's the question, and there's no way to evaluate them. Is that the question?
No, that's not the question. It's even if you just had one other faith.
Right.
There's just one other faith that someone else has in the world. Right. And they believe it for the exact same reasons that you're positing. But they are not compatible. So you're going to just say, I believe my faith because it's my personal experience. And they're going to say the exact same thing. And in the end, we haven't evaluated truth at all. We've gotten nowhere.
But people do change. I mean, people do change. You have an experience. I hope you learn from that experience. You learn from encountering another person.
I'm not talking about change. I'm talking about finding out what is true.
Right.
I personally want to find out what our next questioner is going to ask.
All right.
The microphone just turned off for some reason, so I'm going to have you ask your question real loud, and then I'm going to go try to take care of this.
I can do that. Imagine that once again for Father Weldon. You've implied several times and said explicitly at least once that your church is encouraging people to find the truth, implying whatever that may be. However, the doctrines of your faith tell me as an atheist that you have the truth, and if I don't follow what you say, I'm going to hell. So how do you rectify what you've said in that your church encourages people to find the truth, while at the same time telling people this is the truth, you have to believe?
Faith cannot be compelled. Faith cannot be compelled. You cannot compel someone to have faith. I'll say that for certain right now. St. Thomas Aquinas said it 800 years ago. I know you can probably all give me examples of where Christians try to force people to have faith. But I'm telling you now that you cannot compel faith. In the Gospels, Jesus would work a miracle, and some people believed in him and some didn't. I could give a great speech and or preach a great sermon, and some people would believe and some wouldn't. So I cannot compel faith. Judgment belongs to God. Judgment belongs to God. He knows the details, the circumstances of each person's life. He knows our encounter with the truth or not. So I'm going to leave that judgment up to God. And I'm going to tell you, I don't know.
How do you know he knows that?
Hey, you don't have the microphone.
How do I know that? Well, in our Catholic system, I guess, God is the divine being who knows everything, who is omnipotent, who knows if he sustains or keeps this whole universe running, the stars and everything that he can know us as individuals. And so that judgment belongs to God. The church has never said that any particular person is in hell. You know, that a particular person is in hell. The church doesn't say that.
I think it's really, really worth pointing out that a lot of times we will hear this idea, like, you know, you either you have free will, you choose to believe, or you don't. You've got the arguments laid out ahead of you. I don't really think that can be said about most beliefs, and I think only religious beliefs is where this is really asserted. I read a lot of Spider-Man comics as a kid. I would love to think that Spider-Man exists and is defending New York City from the scourge of God and Dr. Doom. I do not have a choice in whether to accept this belief as true or not. Apollo's sun chariot, you know, it'd be metal as all hell if it were up there dragging the sun across the sky. It would rule. I don't have a choice about whether or not to believe it. The evidence is just so bad for Apollo and Spider-Man that I don't get a choice in the matter. As much as I would love to believe that it's true, I can't. You know, and I think this is only asserted when we have, well, of course we have Jesus teaching, and some people staunchly choose to remain steadfast unbelievers because it's all part of the narrative. The author of the Gospels need there to be unbelievers who, despite having seen a miracle in front of them from the Son of God, wouldn't believe. No thanks. Who of us, if we witnessed a miracle, would just, no thanks, Jesus. Too much evidence, I'm not having it. That's not for me.
So there's free will, where is it?
I'm not the one asserting it, right? You're arguing that.
Where, is there such a thing as free will?
Sam Harris would say no.
Sam Harris would
Okay,
say
so
no.
there's, all right.
He's a neuroscientist after all.
So, right.
Free will, that's all, it's in the brain, right?
So in our brain,
reptile
there's
brain, or
chemical reactions, stuff going on physically in our brain. So that's all we are. So what is, to me, this whole thing is pointless then. We're just a fancy tadpole.
Right,
You know, we're just a very fancy tadpole.
what you're saying is that if Catholicism or religion or any faith tradition is just the quest for truth, is just to try, not lowercase t on this truth, right? Just finding out what reality is and how it works.
Right.
You're saying this is meaningless if we don't have a magic being living behind our eyes.
I think it's meaningless if there's no purpose.
How is there not a purpose? I mean, here we are, right? The idea of understanding reality seems to me itself a monumental purpose.
We live in an absolutely incredible universe.
Sure.
Amazing complexity that gives rise to a myriad of different relationships and complications. That's fascinating. And if all it is that it's just a grand story, a fantastic story, and we're a part of it, I think that should be good enough. You know, we go to the movies just to see a great story. And this story is the greatest story that has ever been concocted. And even if
They're
it's
not concocted.
even if it's just
Yeah,
natural,
for something to be concocted. It
Just
hasn't
feeding right into it.
I'm
It
sorry.
hasn't been concocted. It hasn't been contrived. You mentioned Pastafarians, they contrived it.
Right.
The greatness
But the
of
universe
story,
has not been contrived. It just exists.
the greatness of the universe is not diminished by the methodology by which it arose. We're still part of an amazing story, even if it's an entirely naturalistic story. And that's good enough for me. It's good enough for me to maintain my curiosity and enjoy my life, because that's what I have.
But you need to have children, because it's the point.
Right, I worry a lot of times we will hear this
That's the
dichotomy
point.
crop up of the naturalists, you know, what life is only, it's only important if it's perpetuating itself, and that's the whole point of life, where the universe is, you know, it's just this thing that we live in. I don't know, I mean, I certainly, and I don't feel like it's good enough for it to just be life arose and then we'll die. And I think if we're honest with ourselves and we acknowledge the way, you know, the believers really feel, they feel as though there is something more to it. And all too often as naturalists, I don't think that you're doing this overtly. A lot of time, we're tempted to say things that come across to believers like we don't accept that they even have that experience. I mean, I sure feel like there's more to the universe than just, I mean, I'm going to grow old and I'm going to be dead and hopefully at least some kids behind me. I mean, that's not the point of life, right? Like, it is so much more important. It is essential that we are compiling, art and knowledge and all of these things.
Hey, Abram, I'm going to need to cut you off. We need to get some more questions. So.
I'm going to need to cut me off too, probably.
I told him to have to shut up.
Ben and Abram were both in Wichita WSU Atheists Agnostics together.
So I feel like with any belief, we need to be able to communicate what exactly it would take to convince us that we were wrong. And so, for instance, I can easily articulate a situation I can tell you exactly what would convince me of the truth of Spider-Man or the truth of Christianity or any of these things, and it would take me less than 60 seconds to do it. But so I'm interested to hear from at least the side on the right, but I'm open to having everybody describe what exactly would convince you that you were wrong in your belief, and specifically, Christianity, faith, whatever.
So is that the principle, like in scientific research, that part of what makes it authentic is that you can prove that it's wrong, or that's what scientists are trying to do. I'm trying to prove that this guy's wrong.
Falsifiability.
Falsifiability. Is that which falsifiability?
Falsifiability. Not per se. I'm just saying, what would I don't believe that my mother is a serial killer. I could tell you what would convince me that she was. What would convince you that Christianity was false?
Well, Christianity is about the belief that Jesus Christ rose from the dead.
Yeah, and he's asking, what would convince you that belief is false?
So, I guess if you say that you can't present evidence that it's false, that means there's no evidence for it? Or?
I'm not saying it's something worth thinking about that I would like to hear.
I think what Ben's trying to say is that one principle for a scientific hypothesis is it has to be falsifiable. So I think he's just asking if you would consider Christianity to be a falsifiable belief, which is that correct, Ben? So you're asking what you could do to disprove it?
Well, just to believe anything, to have a belief about something is to say that we stand in some relation, that our belief represents the way that the world actually is, such that if the world was different, we wouldn't have that belief. So, how would the world look to convince you that Christianity was false?
Well, I guess I don't know how you. I feel I'm in a corner because if I say that, if you demonstrate to me that the resurrection never happened, but then you would say, all of you would say that there was no evidence that it happened in the first place. So to me, that's the essential belief of our Christian faith.
Yeah, and I don't think it's supposed to
So
be.
I don't know how you get that.
Right. I don't think it's meant to be a gotcha.
Right.
It's just in the same way that I believe my mom is an awful cook.
Right.
Right. Now I could be convinced that belief is false. Right. But if back in the 70s, tons of documents are produced that are authenticated that she actually took a lot of cooking classes. There's photographs of her with top chefs. That she'd just been hiding it from me this whole time, and that somehow my dad had been getting great pastries from her this whole time, and that she'd just been giving me mac and cheese. Right. Right. It could easily, and who knows what her motivation for doing all this would be, but events could fall into place such that I would have to change my mind and start reevaluating my belief that she was an awful cook. Right. So what would that look like? For me, for atheism, if I'm wrong about atheism, then some reports about things like miracles that can be authenticated. If James Randi's challenge gets taken up and somebody gets $1 million, I'm gonna have a hard time, disputing that. So if somebody comes forth with really solid scientific, evidence of a miracle occurrence, And so that's going to start, giving us a broader platform to start talking about the truth of any of our faith traditions, and on and on and on. If we had something in the Bible, for instance, that would talk about if Jesus in the book of Acts, Jesus in the book of Acts, if he shows up, right, and he just says something along the lines of, this isn't going to make a lot of sense to you first century Jews, but trust me, in 2013, this smarmy atheist is going to be up on stage, and underneath this chair is going to be, an envelope. When he opens that, there's going to be coordinates on it, so that when you get to the moon, you can dig 60 feet down, you will find a treasure chest. In that treasure chest will be original manuscripts of the Gospel of Mark. And if this goes down, my mind will be blown. I mean, there's no way you could not start talking about Christianity as straight fact at that point, right? My mind will have to be changed. I've really got to reevaluate the facts. At that point, I will be wrong about atheism. What would that look like for Christianity? Maybe not as colorfully.
Sir, I don't know what to say. You point out, that this table is here, or that things that we know by our natural senses. Faith is proposing that there is something beyond what our natural senses are able to grasp. That's what we're proposing.
Well, that is a proposal. It doesn't sound like faith is that proposal. It sounds, to see the distinction where a lot of people propose. I mean, psychics, they also propose that there's something beyond our five senses, that there's something beyond the physical world. If that's just what we're calling faith, then it's just an unproven hypothesis. I certainly wouldn't want to be in that position.
Okay, we can move on to the next question. It seems like this is kind of becoming a real hypothetical kind of discussion, so if you guys are all okay, we'll just go on to the next. Okay.
And that's good, because I've got a more practical question for each one of you, but I'd like to start with Jamar and Abram. You guys would each answer this question. What evidence would you accept? I know, especially Abram mentioned, the example of the moon, and you mentioned the cosmological argument, the anthropological argument, and there's different well-known arguments for the existence of God, but obviously since you're on the left table, or to my left, you're right, those arguments haven't been acceptable evidence. And so like a courtroom goes through and says what's acceptable evidence and what's not, I'm not proposing that we should just believe a blind faith, but so what's evidence for you? Because that might not be evidence for me. So that's my question. What is acceptable evidence for you?
The best answer for that for me is prediction, right? The real core of the scientific method is the ability to test a theory. You come up with an idea how things ought to work, and its merits are based on its ability to foresee the future, right? Everybody can, hindsight is 20/20. We all know what would happen, but can you predict what happens in the future? That'd be the most important thing to me. So, more specifically, when you're talking about what's it going to take for me to believe in a God, it's not going to be hearsay or a trusted friend or a feeling in my heart. Something has to happen predictably, consistently, that is indicative of that God.
Whereas I would say that the whole physical universe it couldn't make itself. It couldn't make itself. It goes back to the cosmological argument, right? Which, to me, it seems like it's a pretty good argument, but
Sure.
So,
Yeah, but you're making an argument out of this negative, right? It's like I can't think of a way where it could make itself, so therefore God. And throughout human history, that's been proven to be the bad way to do things. Like, there's this volcano over here, it keeps exploding. I bet there's a troll underneath there just banging away. It's the wrong way to do things. You know, it's okay to say, I don't know, therefore I don't know.
Right. And I'm perfectly willing to say that about God. I don't know.
I have a question for Father Weldon and Alex.
Yes.
Alex had mentioned that one of the reasons he was drawn to Catholicism was its consistency. And Father Weldon mentioned that it's all about the search for truth. With these restrictions that were implemented 2,000 years ago, how can there be a true search for truth if you continue to live by the restrictions that were created?
What restrictions?
Restrictions that women cannot hold places of leadership within the church. Only the man can be pope. Those are restrictions. People can't use birth control. Those are restrictions. How do those restrictions aid in a search for truth?
Well, there's a field of morality or ethics. I mean, human beings in all sorts of different cultures have studied ethics, and I think that the church has studied ethics. They don't find it as just a given. Theologians down through the centuries have tried to understand, we as human beings, when we make choices, will they help us to meet our end? Are they in accord with reason? So there's certainly the church has a stance or a view about what is the goal of our human life and what is in accord with natural reason. But I think, that's what theologians do, is ask those questions. Is this, and so new things that come about, in different times or periods in history, new things are brought up. And so theologians grapple with those things and try to figure out what that is.
If I can respond briefly, there was a speech recently given by Bill Gates, actually, in Saudi Arabia, where he was speaking to a Muslim audience, and they'd actually been divided by a partition down the center, with all the men on one side, the women, the veiled women on the other side. And a questioner had asked him, "Is it realistic for our country to become one of the top 5 superpower economies in the next 10 years?" And after a moment of contemplation, he responded that, not while you're not really embracing fully half of your entire population, right? So in my mind, no. While there are restrictions placed on women that don't just put everybody on the same level, intellectually, financially, and so on, you're just cutting yourself short of resources for no reason.
Would you like a quick response to that before we go on to the next question? Or are you good? Okay. And so we've got time for 2 more questions. We've got this one here, and I've got a gentleman down there, and then we're going to have to wrap it up.
The cosmological argument, why is it easier to posit that all-knowing, all-divine, all-omniscient, any characteristic we attribute to God, than a unknowing, unconscious, natural process like a singularity or something we still don't understand? Why is God a better position than an unknown process that we haven't figured out?
Well, certainly that's the work of science, is to, they're searching that. They're trying to figure that out. I would say the words the Big Bang Theory. I don't know what that means. I'm not a physicist. So science is trying to figure that out. To me, it seems like anytime the creator of something has to, to me that word just flows right out of my mouth. That a system comes about or exists, that whatever is the principle of that or the source of that system must be greater than that system.
That doesn't answer the question. What created God? It had to be a more complex person, because everything has gotten more complex in evolution. How can we say God was there every time before everything was created, but not some natural process that we don't yet understand.
Could you repeat the question back? I'm sorry, I'm way
He asked the
already.
question, who created God? So doesn't God have to have a big, something that created him or it? Doesn't God have to have a source other than himself? So the cosmological argument is that there has to be an unmoved mover, that there has to be some power, some force that began things, and that power or that force, whatever word you want to use, is the beginning, and that everything that sets those dominoes in motion flows, but there has to be a beginning. Now to me, that's a philosophical concept, that there has to be a beginning. Whereas I think your other choice is that things just continue in a cycle. The universe expands and contracts and kind of goes in and out for forever, whatever forever is, as the time comes. So.
My question is for Abram and Jamar, and it does come from the perspective that the greatest leap of faith of all is to believe that there is no God and no Creator. Science and reason tell us that everything has a beginning, that at some point in time, in the beginning, if you will, absolutely nothing existed. At some point in time, something inanimate, non-living, came into existence. At some point in time thereafter, animate, living matter came into existence. How do you, as atheists, explain the creation of the universe?
Sure. How do we trump Stephen Hawking and Albert Einstein and Lawrence Krauss and all of these brilliant thinkers and just single-handedly win our Nobel Prize and explain the single greatest question that haunts, there is no area of just blanket ignorance that exists in human knowledge, right? Then what happened before the universe? So I think Jamar may agree with me here when we just say, dunno.
I do want to say that because you can't explain it.
No, not that we can't, but that's just it. No one can, so we're honest about that. That's the point. Now, I like that you had started the question with science tells us that everything had a beginning, and then turn around and say, but since people like Stephen Hawking who say science is not needed for these systems to have gotten started and to have continued, then science is all kinds of wrong, right? So it doesn't seem to me a great leap of faith to come to no conclusion when there is no evidence. Carl Sagan is a great agnostic. When this question of alien life, for instance, he says there's tons of ways alien life can have come about in the universe. So for all we know, it's out there. There's tons of carbon. Science suggests that life comes from carbon. It's a crazy notion. That's primarily made up of it. But we don't have any direct evidence whatsoever for alien life. So this is an area we have to just acknowledge. We have to throw up our hands and say, until more data comes in, we don't know. That's the only intellectually honest comment. And some of us aren't comfortable with just saying some things we don't know about. I don't know where Amelia Earhart disappeared to, right? But just because I don't have an answer doesn't mean it had to be magic.
It's really the argument of ignorance, and you can go back in time, any time in history, and there are things that we know now with a great degree of confidence that people didn't know before. I gave the example before of the volcanoes, right? So if you don't know how volcanoes work, therefore God. You don't know how the universe came about, therefore God. You don't know how the solar system revolves or works, therefore God. If you're looking for knowledge, that's the wrong way to do it.
We each have to make a quick closing statement. We'll just go through in the same order. So Father Weldon, would you like to start us off again? Or close us off again? I'm not sure how to say that.
Well, I thank you for this opportunity and And again, I try to be sincere in searching for the truth. And to me, I just want to put out there that you cannot compel faith. And so I'm here to say that to all of you, that no one can compel you to have faith, and that the gift of our human reason is a good thing. And we should use our human reason to understand the world around us and how it works. And that ultimately we're made, I believe, that our human fulfillment is more, it's part of that search for the truth. That is part of our search for the truth. That's part of our human fulfillment. And that we're more than just a biological organism like the other organisms on the planet, that our success is our, just in this world. So that search for the truth, I think, is inherent to the human person and what we're all about. And so I think we have that as a common ground that we can continue this discussion. Oh, and just by the way, these are an author that I like, Stanley Yaki, is an author that I like. He's a physicist, and he does write from a Catholic perspective. He's also a historian of science. So he's went into all of these philosophical debates about cosmology and the nature of the universe and those types of things. So if you want an author that's much better than me, I would say Stanley Yaki is a good one to go to. So I just put him out. He's really gone into a lot of these things, and so I just put him before you as an option.
Thank you. Jamar?
I'd like to thank the audience for putting up with a few guys up here babbling on and on. The most important thing about this discussion, and I think this conference, isn't to make judgments so much on who won a debate or who is right or wrong, but more on how we ought to explore the universe around us. It's an amazing place. It's an amazingly complex place, and we as humans tend to try to make it how we want it to be. It's going to be incredible no matter what your perspective is on it. What we need to appreciate is the story of our universe, and at least for me, about the best thing we can do in participating in that is just being honest in our discovery of it. I think it's fantastic. I want to thank you guys. I know that everybody up here has a sincere commitment to doing that, and to me, to be a part of that, to be with other people here that are honest about that and sincere about that, it's just fantastic.
Do you have any closing statements you'd like to make?
So I'll just say thanks for having us out. I know a lot of you, do disagree with our side of the table, but I think it's great that we can sit here and at least have this conversation. Well, it is about the truth. We just choose to go about it in different ways.
Thanks.
I find in a lot of conversations with believers that you'll be going just fine. Everybody's being civil. Reasons are getting talked about. My reasons get shot down. Their reasons get shot down. And you get to a point where the faith card gets played, and a lot of times it's seen as a trump card by believers, and it's a conversation stopper. I don't think in most cases even that's intentional. They just say, look, well, it's just my faith. It's not about all this evidence. It's really just about a simple faith. And I want to make the case that that's not where the conversation should be ending, but really talking about why faith is important to someone, what its role is in all of these conclusions, is where the conversation should be beginning. So I guess that's my takeaway.
Thanks, Abram.